Today is Friday, November 22nd, 2013, 3:07 a.m. where I am. This is one of the quietest times where I live, so it's a good time to record. And I'm hoping to talk with you about an incredibly important topic that we are all involved in all the time. But before I do that, I'm going to say a few things about why I'm doing this. So the first thing is, I've learned some very important things, and I can more deeply understand them because they're unusual things by talking about them. And sometimes it can be hard to find someone to talk about them with, so I kind of imagine an audience and talk about them that way. And this way I learn a great deal more about them, and other people can also, if they wish, follow my process and then teach me new things or correct things that I'm confused about. So in that way we can learn together, and I think it's very important that we do that. I think education is not something we've actually seen. It's not what happens in schools. It's what happens when people who are passionate about discovering what it means to be human, alive, intelligent, what language is, what knowledge might become if we had a different relationship with it, and like to explore questions very deeply in a living way that stays alive and doesn't merely seek a self-satisfying answer. Well, this is education, and we're not really doing it yet, so I'm hoping to find out how to do that. Find out what it looks like and become part of that process, not just find out representationally, but find out by being it. So the topic that I want to address today is a peculiar one. It has a lot to do with intelligence, because the way that we choose to relate with the topic will radically impact our ability to be intelligent and the nature of our intelligence. And what I'm going to talk about is a polarity. I'm going to call it a complementary polarity that is a choice we have whenever we approach a situation or an idea or an event, a phenomenon, a thing, a being, and we ask ourselves what it is. What is that? And we all know the putative answer. We know it's a pen, it's a doll, it's a cat, it's a book, it's a rainstorm, it's kissing. But there's so much that we don't know about this word what. And also there are some choices that happen when we're faced with things we don't like or are unexpected or we feel challenged that we need to examine very carefully, because they impact our intelligence and our ability to be human, to make choices at all in the future, and to even have a future. So, and not only that, they are the basis of pretty much every problem that human cultures produce, this complementary polarity. And the two poles of this toy or this model are declaration and imitation. So we kind of either look at something and we declare what it is, and thus in so doing we declare what we are, or we look at it and we invite discovery. We invite both ourselves into change and discovery and growth, and we also invite our relationship with the identity of that, whatever it is, the phenomenon or event, relationship, etc. So our minds are a bit like animals in an ecosystem, in that if there's poison in the ecosystem, they're going to absorb it. And in our culture, we tend to blame the victims for this. A good example of it is that the man who created ethanol was thoroughly rewarded financially as his additive was added to gasolines all around the world. What we didn't realize was that it was going to poison everyone with lead in their blood, and that lead would lead to a radical upsurge in violent crime and antisocial behavior. A radical upsurge. I don't know the statistics. You can do the research yourself. Most of those people who were actually the victims of lead poisoning were then punished as perpetrators. In fact, they were perpetrators, weren't they? Well, Who was the perpetrator? The poisoner or the victims who then signaled about having been poisoned? And this is the problem with the idea of punishment for crime and many other similar ideas. What I want to get at is this. When we are born into human cultures, and if these cultures are particularly litigious, that is, if they like to prosecute cases, if they are declarative, that's a specific path of development for the society, its people, if you could call them that, and their intelligence or their ability to have some. Here's why. The kind of intelligence that turns around and declares what things are, must have been, were, who did what, this is a kind of intelligence that is pernicious, domineering, aggressive, as it exists in human minds and cultures. I'm not saying that, I'm speaking figuratively, it doesn't have its own emotions, yet in us it may as well, because it acts just as if it did, or very nearly as if it did. Since we do. So there are aspects of our relationship with knowledge and language and how we relate with that that dictate the kind of minds we're going to develop, and the kinds of minds that we're going to develop to be prosecutors and defenders and prison guards and wardens and prisoners and warriors and punishers and police are not especially suited to our humanity. They're not especially suited to our survival. They are not at all suited to making communities or having children. They are unfriendly in general to living things. They make museums where there were once forests, or they make bank accounts where there were once futures. You wouldn't want to trust them with much, and we've been badly misled by this entire idea of punish someone who's done something that you think is wrong, for many, many reasons that I hope to explore a few of here. Before I do that, I just want to say again that we're living in a cultural environment that encourages litigation. It encourages us to freeze identities in shapes that are well suited to prosecution, punishment, vengeance, torture, war, and many other things. And they are not very suited to learning, intelligence growth, invitation, possibility, the future, all the things that really are the fundamental basis of our hope and power as human beings. They're also just not friendly to life in general, as you can see. Right? Life in general doesn't win in the courtrooms, ever. The oceans aren't winning in the courts. None of the wars that have been prosecuted, with very, very few exceptions, were really much except unthinkable atrocity magnified to almost impossible scope and effect over time. So I'd like to just offer personal observation. Prosecution doesn't work. In fact, it's a method of magnifying the damage of whatever might have occurred. And when we freeze identity, when we declare it, when we say, well, I know what happened, who did what, and I'm the only one who knows, I'm one witness, but I know the truth, we're making a very serious mistake in endless numbers of ways that we can prosper greatly from examining. Similarly, when we don't do that, when we suspend our judgment, meaning not just do we judge whether a thing is good or bad, or if we know that's a tree or a toothbrush, not just that, but if we suspend the judgment of, so yes, suspend that, what is that, I'm not sure, I know we call it a tree, that's a convenience that we use, but I probably don't know much about what it is yet, I'd have to be more intimate with it. That's the beginning of knowledge, right? So I can look at something and say, well, I wasn't able to have lunch today. And then I can think, well, I shouldn't think that's bad, but that's already too much thinking, because we don't know. That may mean that I have a much better dinner later, or that the place that I was supposed to have lunch, I might have been hurt there. Perhaps I'd have not had a good lunch, or we just don't really know. The other thing is, when we freeze identity, we're pretending we know things about time that aren't true. So, for example, if I lose my job, that's a bad thing. Especially if I liked my job and feel frightened that I might not be able to get another one. I might not. But knowing whether that's a bad thing or not doesn't come with losing my job or anything else. It comes with what? I don't even know. Ever? Does it ever come? Because the meaning of losing one's job changes in millions of ways per second. So if I just decide it's bad, I'm kind of done watching the change or being a part of it. I just have to stick with my decision now. And not only that, there's so many other problems. It's as if we're, imagine that you're traveling in a stream, and the stream is going forward, whatever the direction that is. And you're walking forward in the stream so that it's not pushing you over, but it gives you a little bit of a push and helps you travel. Well, that's kind of like time and being. Being and time are a bit like this stream. And if we turn around in the stream and face backwards, we've got to stop now for a moment and say, well, that's a this, and she did that, and on this day, he crashed into my car, and I won $1,000, and my dad called me a mean person, and my mom loved me. Well, if we do all these things, we say all these things, we have to preserve them. In other words, we have to spend energy to keep them from changing in the flow of time and being in which we are, with which we are intimately involved in every way, in every aspect of our own being and time. So the problem is we have to spend a lot of energy to freeze these things in a specific set of expectations, right? And then we're going to stay turned around and not even really see where we're going, because we're so busy looking backward and with our court cases or whatever, whether they are good or bad, whether they're things about our ego, I'm great, I'm intelligent, I won this battle, or I'm bad, I'm poor, I lost this battle, or whether they are things about the culture, there are things about wrongs done to us, which are huge for most of us. We have a giant collection of wrongs that were done to us and to others we love, all of which we constantly refresh with the energy of our being. And this is an impossibly sophisticated investment, and over time it grows unthinkably, and it builds a mind in its image, a mind facing backwards, declaring identity against the obvious flows of time and being, against all possibility, against most hope. And this is what most of us get stuck in when we're in any kind of a trap. We've declared the identities, and we believe our declarations, and we insist that others do too. And in many cases, if they won't, we will dismiss them. If you don't believe the identities that I've frozen in the specific ways I froze them, for the purposes of my pain, my ego, my vengeance, which are not good purposes, let's face it. In fact, they're pretty much toxic purposes when used this way. Then you're not my friend, or you don't understand me, or you're one of the people that hurt me. This is not going to fly. Not even kind of. Whereas if we turn around and face forward with the flow of change, being, and time, as all of the things we would have frozen evolve, we will evolve with them. Whereas when we were facing backwards, we had to freeze our own evolution in that shape, in the shape of all the court cases that are unsolved or unresolved yet, and all of the, the structured identity that we insist upon believing about other people, ourselves, history, events, losses, injuries, gains, accomplishments, all of these things. This is an investment our intelligence can't afford. And if we release it for even a moment, the effect on our intelligence is staggering. It actually leaps into almost ecstatic developmental splendor. The moment that we no longer have to spend most of our intellectual, cognitive, and emotional energy freezing these non-existent conceptual ideas in our minds, preserving them, and feeling all the feelings that brings up in us, both the act of having to do that all the time, which is we usually don't acknowledge that, we don't know that we're doing that, we just do it, but both the act of doing it and then all the pain of our reflection upon those things, so that we hurt ourselves with things that are incompletely specified in reality. We hurt ourselves with them instead of inviting that incompleteness into many different modes of benefit and abundance and power and fuel, right? It's almost as if we're drinking something we're meant to use as fuel, and it freezes us solid. There's a biblical parable about Lot's wife as they were leaving Sodom, and we're told that this was a city of great sin, but it's not hard to understand that a city of incredible misunderstanding, such as those that we have, in fact, precisely the kind of misunderstanding that is litigious and loves to make court cases and prosecutes people all day long, and has people prosecuting themselves in their heads and prosecuting each other and their countries and the world, instead of doing anything, instead of living, instead of being something beautiful, or building wars and prisons and court cases. So, she was told, and I'm not claiming that I'm using the Bible as a spiritual metaphor. I think it's just a very recognizable story. As Lot and his wife were told that Sodom was to be destroyed, and they left, she was specifically instructed, do not turn around, no matter what you may hear. Now, if we're on the verge of discovering that something we've done was not very intelligent. For example, let's say we've spent most of our life turning around and declaring what things are, as I'm saying, and we're afraid to discover that because if we were to turn around, we would declare that everything we had ever done was a terrible mistake. Well, why was that? Why were we so confused? And we may not want to do that. We may feel, frightened of saying, if I turn around now, I'm going to have to see that all that turning around I did before was a mistake. So I'm just going to stay in the way I have been. It's going to be easier. We won't say that consciously, but inside us there's something that feels that. So it's actually not true. When you turn around and face forward, you may notice that wasn't very wise to be doing all the declaration and all of the servicing that, and the prisons and the policing and the courtrooms that we run in our mind and all this, or the courtrooms that we hope for in the world or even chase in the world. They don't bring justice, that's for sure. They bring agony. You have to pay a parasite $10,000 to get 5. That's the... And no one gets justice, but someone gets punished, and half of the someone is you. I don't think that's anything like justice. In fact, justice doesn't look like punishment at all. You can't pay for a crime. You didn't take a loan out from the person you hurt. You can't pay them back. You can't pay society because you didn't take a loan out from them. There's no paying involved. The whole idea that it's an accounting game is absolutely ridiculous. Justice looks like balance and healing for everyone involved, usually including the person who we would ordinarily prosecute, because in most, or if not, I think in most cases that person is a victim. And to presume that we should then all get together and torture them, and thus become complicit in that, that's a really sick idea. To base a culture on that is insane. And no child will survive that unscarred. A child growing up in a culture like that must become its image. That image is incredibly toxic. It's inhuman. It's uninhabitable. And it's funny when I tell people that prisons are the wrong idea, they look at me like I'm out of my mind and think like, well, what do you expect us to do? Just let those people out? To be quite frank, it would be better than what they're doing now. Actually, yeah, it would be. But that's not my expectation. My expectation is that we change the culture so dramatically that we just stop kind of producing criminals. And one of the ways that we do that is by not declaring them criminals. And by inviting each other to discover what healing and justice might look like if they didn't look like the travesties that we practice. So there is every possible benefit for turning around and inviting reality into developmental exploration, because that's what it's going to do no matter what you do. So if you're with that process, you've got anywhere from 10 to 1,000 times the liberty, opportunity, intelligence, power, sensing, perspective. This is the only way to fly. Very, very rarely should we turn and declare anything, turn behind us, so to speak, and declare anything, because we will turn to stone. And a stone is a kind of memory, right? You can tell that's by looking at the mountains or even a rock in your hand. And many indigenous people think of stone as memory, elementally. And this is kind of what was being said in the biblical parable. Don't turn around, you're going to turn into solid memory. It'll just become memory, you won't be able to flow anymore. They don't mean memory in the in the positive sense. They mean it really in the frozen sense, like writing, a dead memory. Yeah. Not that writing is entirely dead. We bring life to it with our minds, but sitting on the page, it's not flowing. Yeah, it's still, it's dead. It's an artifact. That's actually what the meaning is, an artifact. So I'm encouraging you to kind of turn around and look forward whenever something happens. And not just that, but not to hold a specific opinion about it, whether it's good or bad, and here's why. Suppose that you just decide you don't know exactly what the phenomenon will mean, even though you may feel that it really, you don't want it, and you can't control it. And by the way, part of the reason we turn around is because we're afraid of not having control, we're afraid of being restricted, we're afraid of being governed. All those things we don't like, so we want to be everybody, we want to play every role in the courtroom, actually, in a sense. It's not we, it's sort of part of us. It's an aspect of our minds. And we don't want to develop brains, or even, and I do mean brains because it changes our brain structure, how we think and act all the time. We don't want to develop brains or minds in the image of this modestly useful aspect that wants to be a god and turn our cultures and our children into its image. We won't survive that. So we need to definitely understand this complementary polarity and what the social, ecological, relational, and intellectual possibilities of choosing the forward-facing invitational model, where you don't decide what things are, you use provisional frameworks that serve your learning and growth, that give you what I would call tactical opportunism. And that's the ability to transform anything that appears to be a challenge into fuel for new degrees of liberty, new ways of seeing that are very intelligent and give you new options for action and thought, and free you from all the devastating repercussions of the feelings and the broken reactions that come when the first model escapes its useful scope and tries to rule the world. The first model being judgment, declaring what things are, telling yourself, I know what this was. Part of the thing that's wrong with that is you don't live in a world by yourself. You need more than one opinion. And often the people that we judge, we need to hear their opinions too, because we have a role in the problems that we don't like in most cases, not in all. But in most cases we have a role and we need to see it to learn. If we're just declaring what happened, we don't have to see our role. No one can make us. We're just telling people what happened. So again, turning around and inviting ourselves into development lets us see what our role was. We can learn from our mistakes much more deeply. And in every way, it's the vital human, intelligent learning process. It's the direction of learning, really the compass point. But there's another feature of this that I want to get at, which is just that when we don't know what something is and we truly don't decide whether it's good or bad, we get a bunch of really strange benefits. And there's some deficits if we do the other thing. So I'll talk about the deficits first. If I know what happened, for example, the other day I walked out on my porch in the backyard, and some construction that had been going on recently had suddenly a lot of it had been completed, and I realized, oh, they're going to block the entire view of my back porch. Now I had some not a happy fact. I really loved that view. I've had it for many years. And but rather than deciding that it was good or bad, I actually didn't decide. I kind of practiced or made a previous commitment to suppose that I might, to not know, to not be able to tell if it was good or bad or what it was. I don't know what that is. It's a big thing. It sure is a big change. Let's see what it means. Let's see what I mean. By doing that, I get to grow, and the phenomenon can develop, and at some point there's things we want to intervene in. Okay, there's times we want that incisive, litigious consciousness that says, for example, my child has cut her hand. I need to do something specific about that. Okay, there are definite environments where that kind of intelligence is useful. But when it escapes its proper scope, it tortures us. I can't do anything about the view. I can't go to war about it. And if I decide what it is, it's going to hurt me. I'm going to be upset. I'm going to hurt other people. My body's going to get damaged by the metabolism. My intelligence and my memory will both be injured by the feelings and the metabolism associated with those feelings. So why don't I just, I'm not quite sure, and that's what I did. I just suspended my evaluation. I suspended my analysis. And I didn't suspend it and say, well, I'll figure out what it is later. No, I just suspended it and said, well, let's grow together. We presume when we lose something, it's bad. A friend of mine had his car stolen last night. And we'd actually been talking about this, that loss isn't necessarily bad. It can, in many cases, be an astonishing benefit. In fact, it's always a benefit if we just face forward. Always. That's a strange thing to hear, but almost any kind of loss is a benefit if we're just going to face forward, because we're going to be able to kind of to condense or to abstract from that loss 5 or 6 treasures that would have been otherwise unavailable to us, and usually they're huge. But if we know what happened, we're going to maybe feel badly. We might hurt ourselves and other people with feelings and actions. We're going to have blame, and we're probably going to carry it until it's resolved. We got to spend all the energy to keep it frozen. We have to freeze ourselves in the role of prosecutor, and we got to keep all the facts straight. There's not much energy for development left. We're looking backwards. Pretty much, our idea of justice becomes things like vengeance and punishment, which means we want to torture people who did things that we've decided are wrong. We want to freeze their identity, call them a this or that, and then torture them. We're going to spend all the energy to do that, and we're going to get everyone else to spend energy to do that too, so we're going to make them complicit in torture. That's a really bad idea. We get court cases, prisons, wars, endless costs that we could have used for incredibly more brilliant purposes that actually solved the problems instead of exacerbating them, which they incredibly exacerbate them. Eventually you move toward a situation where there's no invitation toward growth for anyone, and it's all declaration of identity. And now we're prosecuting our own people, ourselves, our pets, you name it. Nature's wildly prosecuted because she can't even defend herself. So we really end up in a big quandary, a set of quandaries that are lethally confused. Whereas if we don't know what's happening, if we're willing to suspend the judgment and invite toward learning and growth and resolution intelligently together, well, we can't hurt ourselves with what happened. We won't have to spend the energy to preserve it, or the role that doesn't fit us as prosecutor, prisoner, guard, courtroom, judge, jury, etc. We won't have to blame anyone, ourselves or anyone else. We probably won't be very afraid, because this mode of invitation is not much like thinking, it's like intimacy. So if you're not thinking about the future, you're not going to be afraid. You're going to be so in the moment and flowing that you're going to be intelligent instead. You'll still be able to talk and think, it just won't be leading your mind. And then you'll be able to intelligently invite, instead of react, you'll be able to intelligently invite specific branches of possibility within the opportunities, the events, the situations that you're involved in, without having to worry about whether you can control them or not, because you can't. And so if you always have to worry about that, you're constantly hurting from it. And in the forward-facing role, you'll be conducting a symphony instead of a prison. You'll be free of almost all constricting models and reactions, and the models that you have will modulate their structure forward and become self-correcting, instead of demanding that you defend them and freeze them. People who would have been enemies are now allies, because you'll just be able to take whatever they've got that's useful, including the things you would have opposed, and transform them instantly, with much less effort, into power and insight. The energies that you would have invested in certifying all of this, right, in proving your models true, and all of this kind of thing, recording them, and blah, 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 remembering them, those are all free now for positive reinvestment. Your memory and your intelligence flourish because the emotions associated with forward flow are really exciting and positive. They're fascinating. They are very learning-oriented and curious, and they also have the qualities of deep seeing, like detectives who are inspired sometimes have. And so all of those factors are going to serve your development in looking forward, instead of your inhibition, which they tend to serve looking backward. Your intelligence and such are turned against you. You'll also be able to assist others who are stuck in the same place really easily just by pointing these kinds of things out to them, and especially with metaphors and stories with which they'll be easily able to see them and feel them. You won't ever be able to be trapped much again in the declaration model. You'll still be able to use it wherever it's useful, but it won't become your God. It won't remake your mind in its image, and you'll start to develop whole new aspects of intelligence that had actually been shut down because you didn't have the energy to invest in them, and B, the terrain that in you and in your experience and thought they would have taken up was totally owned by these other habits that are pernicious, domineering, aggressive. They want to persist at any cost, etc. You wouldn't want to trust anything like that in your mind. And then, the other thing is that over time, you're going to add to both of these lists dramatically and uniquely. And if we were doing this together, we would be able to build cultures, even small cultures, that would have incredible forward learning momentum. And really, the power to change a nation in a very short period of time is well within our hands. It's going to disappear if we decide to turn and declare. The direction that the power for assembling new cultures, new forms of intelligence that are powerful enough to both embrace the potential of our human life and birth on Earth, rescue us from the myriads of problems that the declarative model is endlessly breeding in its name. Armed with these sorts of insights, we have the power to change anything. Anything. There's no harm in history that can drag us down ever again. We will never again play the victim role, ever once. We'll never waste more energy on that. And we'll still be able to love each other and adore life and feel all the feelings we want to feel. We just won't have to preserve them in bank vaults and defend them against all comers and spend most of our lives feeding things that are functionally vampiric. It just doesn't work. So this is an exciting idea because simply by turning around and facing forward into invitation, we become the conductors rather than the prison guards. What a fascinating possibility, not just for each one of us, but for our cultures. I hope that we can explore that together, and I look forward to many more amazing learning sessions. Thanks for joining me. Goodbye for now.